Well, good afternoon and aloha.
Aloha.
Well, it's certainly been a memorable as well, 29th Annual SIOP Conference.
Oh, love it.
The sessions, special activities, and networking have truly been outstanding. During the last year, we tried to focus on connections, connecting our members, examining how our science connects with other fields, and looking at how we can expand IO science and practice through connections. Today, we will wrap up with a very special keynote address that highlights how connections can be built and strengthened through branding. I want to thank the presenters and the many volunteers who helped make this conference such a success. There's always an enormous amount of work that goes into planning the annual SIOP conference, but this year has taken a truly extraordinary effort to bring us to this very special location. So please, special thanks now to our conference chair, Robin Cohen. And to Dave Nershi, our Executive Director Extraordinaire. And Evan Seinar, our Program Chair. Excellent. And now I'd like to invite Robin up to the stage to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Geoff Colon. I have a lot to say because he's done a lot, so bear with me. Geoff Colon, Group Marketing Manager at Microsoft, is a strategic digital leader, design thinker, mobile content creator, and social media influencer. A forward-thinking innovation specialist and business futurist, he has engaged in emerging media since the advent of Napster in 1998. Colon founded his own influencer marketing agency in 2002, years before the concept became mainstream in public relations. He utilizes the hive mind concept for team leadership, where no one is the smartest person in the room, but the room is the smartest person in the room. His technique when approaching leadership is to allow teams made up of diverse individuals with a variety of disciplines to feel like they are part of something bigger. A master of big data, he uses analytics to plan content creation, distribution, and lead generation within the paid, owned, and earned ecosystem. He is an expert in B2B, B2C, and B2I marketing with a vast social footprint and creator and executor of several social campaigns for Fortune 500 brands. He has worked with such impressive clients as IBM, Spotify, Netflix, Red Bull, Coca-Cola, Lysol, Smirnoff, The Economist, Food Network, History Channel, USA Network, and American Express. He currently produces and hosts the weekly Disruptive Innovation FM podcast and is a regular contributor for the Microsoft Advertising blog. Please welcome with me, Geoff Colon.
All right. Aloha. I hope everyone's enjoyed their time here in Hawaii. I know when I was speaking to Robin and Tammy about this event back in November, which seems like 2 years ago now, they said, hey Geoff, we really are interested in your work and we're interested in having you come and speak at the conference. And I've always been fascinated with psychology. My mother was a behavioral psychologist. But when they said, hey, it's going to be in Hawaii, I said, where do I sign up? And of course, I hope everyone's enjoyed their blue Hawaiis and Mai Tais the past couple of days. I tried to fit in by actually looking the color of a blue Hawaii. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about the brand called We. And this is going to be a little interactive. I might actually call on some people to come up and talk, which is tough in a larger room like this, but it'll be fun in terms of gaining the most from this particular presentation. So a little bit just about me and my background. I currently work at Microsoft. I've been there about 11 months. I work on the product called Bing Ads, which if anyone has done search marketing before, Bing Ads is sort of the equivalent of Google AdWords. And I work on their social media and research and development team. So it's a lot of product innovation using data and new forms of communication, which is a lot of fun. But I spent the last 17 years in New York City. I worked at Ogilvy and Mather for a really long time, which if anyone watches Mad Men is sort of based on Ogilvy and Mather. David Ogilvy was a famous advertising executive. But I don't want to necessarily bore you with the fact that, oh no, here's a brand guy talking to a bunch of people who have PhDs, because I think you'll actually learn a lot from this today. Actually, a show of hands, how many PhDs are in the room today? All right, this is awesome. So marketing is fascinating when it comes to actually education, and we'll delve into that. Let's get a little micro or macro level for a second. To this conference. In the back, where are you from? Tel Aviv. Excellent. Actually, that's in the presentation. You'll see that in a bit. Who else? All right, excellent. Who came east of the Mississippi? All right. And who came west of the Mississippi? Anybody from Brooklyn? Yes. What part of Brooklyn? Where? All right, cool. A Park Slope resident for 17 years. And then finally, who is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania? All right, go Steelers. So let me start here. This is a really great quote that I love from the late Tip O'Neill, and there's a theme to everything I chose for us today to talk about, which is all politics is local. And you might wonder, why did you choose this particular quotation? Well, it's interesting. If you think about government and politics, you have a lot of legislators that will say things like, I'm going to draft the most interesting legislation possible that is going to have an effect on the country and the world at large. And what Tip O'Neill would tell a lot of legislators is he would say, don't worry about that, because you know what? You actually have more of an effect if you actually go local with your messaging, which I find interesting because every 4 years we run out to vote in the largest national or federal elections for president, yet we don't really show up for local elections, and that probably has more of an effect on our daily life if you think about it. So think about this in terms of, as we dive deeper into how this involves the field of IO psychology. Rollo Rees-May, famous psychologist. Communication leads to community, that is, to understanding, intimacy, and mutual valuing. So again, we're not all islands to ourselves. A lot of what we do is based on the community as a whole. So I remember about 7 or 8 years ago, someone said, hey Jeff, what do you do for a living? And I said, I'm a social media specialist. And everyone said, what is that? Now, if I ask the room, what's a social media specialist? How many people can raise their hand and say what it is? Few people. Okay, the reason why that has worked is because that discipline has actually advanced what it does in a way that more people understand what that field is. Again, an important thing to note in terms of IO psychology. Can't do it alone. We have to do it as a community. And then the third quote, and this is a long one, from Jim Joseph, who wrote The Personal Experience Effect. I would argue that each of our personal brands began at birth. When mom and dad gave us a name, they unknowingly launched a new brand, the first of a lifetime of personal decisions that makes us each uniquely our own being, our brand. From that day forward, we spend our lives living up to our given name. This is also interesting because what we decide to do with our life, where we went to school, a lot of that is almost brand management, if we think about it in some respects. And that plays a lot into also being an IO psychologist. So let's talk a little bit about the brand demand story for IO psychology. Now, I don't know if this is new to everyone here. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this. This was noted heavily on the SIOP website. But this is a very in-demand field right now. A lot of companies actually are interested in IO psychology. Yet there probably would be more if they actually maybe knew what the discipline offered. So this is a big area again. The field will grow between 53%, or will grow 53% between 2012 and 2022. But IO will remain a relatively small field because of the rigorous qualifications to become an industrial organizational psychologist. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we actually advance this so it doesn't remain a small field and we all play a part, the brand called we. So linguistics is a huge area, and I think you'll see a lot of companies go more into hiring chief linguistic officers because language is changing, communication is changing the way that we actually talk to one another. So I look at the definition of brand because, again, a lot of people might say, oh no, is he going to show us case studies of Coca-Cola and American Express? I mean, come on, Jeff, I do research at a university. How does this play into me being an IO psychologist? But the definition of brand is changing. So a lot of what we look at in terms of the definitions here, some of them don't necessarily apply anymore on how we use them. The fifth one is interesting because it notes brands are used in business, marketing, and advertising. And I want you to pay most attention to the ones in terms of brands are used in marketing. Because marketing also involves ideas, not just necessarily the selling of consumer goods. So let me tell you a little bit about my favorite brand. It was born in 1932 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It offered a couple of different services: urban planning and politics, economics, statistics. It ventured into some new areas like psychology, and then it took on two new partners and offered communication services and public administration planning. And you might say, what is this company? What is this brand? Probably a small brand from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What is it? Well, it's my late father, Frank Cologne. So he's from Pittsburgh originally. And he got his degree in economics, got his PhD in political science, got tenure at Lehigh University, did a number of different things. Now it's interesting because I don't know if my late father would actually agree with this because he'd be like, oh geez, we're people, we're not brands. But how he managed his career and what he did is actually very much what a brand manager does almost on a daily basis for small and medium-sized brands. So again, I want you to think about how you tell your own story. How does it involve your discipline? How does it involve the things that you do to encourage others to know about what IO psychology is? And if we apply this then to other people, we can actually look and apply this in terms of my own story. So I'm from Bethlehem. I have a BA in mass communications. I'm currently a digital strategist. I aspire to be a philanthropist. My favorite brand is IBM. I love learning, teaching, writing, playing soccer, Brooklyn, mobile technology, and my daughters, Olive and Matilda. And then my own value proposition is I seek out and disrupt how we presently work and communicate in order to lay a foundation for how we will interact in the future. So I figured out sort of what my value proposition is, what my personal story is, and this is very important. We all sort of have to tell our own story in terms of what we offer the world, especially in disciplines where others may not really understand what that discipline has to offer. A lot of people probably, and I was having a great conversation with Jose about this before we started, if I ask most people, what does a psychologist do? Many say, oh, you talk to people about their problems on a couch, right? And that's where communication actually helps shape that there's a number of different areas of psychology. There's a number of different areas in all types of disciplines. But then let's just not actually use words. So the big thing that we've actually learned from the social web and communications at large is we learn more when it comes to visualization. So the story I actually laid down here, I then translated it into pictures. Because if you look at how we've actually learned from the beginning of of time in some respects in civilization, a lot of it is based on pictures, hieroglyphics, cave drawings, etc. So think about this also when it comes time to actually explaining what you do. Many times we might try to write more things, long case papers, and that's important. I think long form studies are part of any discipline, which is important, but when you're trying to explain to others who might actually be interested in being part of IO psychology, how do you visualize that for them in a way that they actually understand? So I'm curious to know what your story is. So I actually would love 3 people if they could come up right now, and if I have to do Socratic method and pick people out, I'd like you to actually come up here, and I have this all laid out for you, and I want you to tell me what your story is, because I think the important thing is I work with a lot of people who they're not comfortable with this. They sort of come from a background where they say, Jeff, I don't want to talk about myself. I've been always told don't do that. Show your results before you talk about yourself. But I think it's also important in terms of when knowing who we are and how we represent IO psychology to sort of do this particular study. So who wants to come up and actually do this in front of everyone? Or do I have to pick out a couple people? All right, come on up. 2 more people. Yay, excellent. That's good. All right, you can see the screen here.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, talking to that.
I'm short. Okay.
There we go.
So my name is Mindy Bergman, and I'm from College Station, Texas now. I have degrees in, which you'll be shocked to hear, industrial organizational psychology. I am currently an associate professor of psychology and a faculty fellow of the Mary Kay O'Connor Process Safety Center in the Dwight Look College of Engineering at Texas A&M University. I'm a little nervous, surprisingly. I aspire to be a force of change for good in the world. My favorite brand is, what is my favorite brand? Kohl's, probably. That's where I spend most of my money. I love my kids. I love to make funny jokes on Facebook about my kids, and I love to read and cook. And my value proposition is to leverage my skills as an IO psychologist to make education more attainable to more people in the state of Texas.
Excellent. It's a grand example. So I need 1 or 2 more people that come up and do this. Okay, come on up. Anybody else? Come on up. And this goes to the theme of connections. You're meeting someone else that maybe afterward you didn't meet, and you'll go and talk to them about some of the things that they're actually interested in. This is important. This ties into Metcalfe's law. I always try to explain this to people. Is this device worth anything if I was the only person on the world that owned it? The answer is no. It's only worth something if other people have it. Metcalfe's law is about the square root of how many people own a communication device. And it's the same thing in terms of your story. You're only as valuable as knowing what everyone else's story is and how you intersect in terms of IO psychology. That's your binding factor, your glue, so to speak.
Okay, I'm up here because
Step on up.
I'm up here because of peer pressure. So my name is Courtney McClooney. I'm from High Point, North Carolina, and currently from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I have degrees in psychology and organizational communication from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm currently a graduate student at the University of Michigan in personality and social context. I aspire to be like my advisor, Lilia Cortina, and a fellow of SIOP one day. My favorite brand is Express. They dress me so well. And I love my family, reading, writing, eating, not cooking, but somehow figuring out ways to eat without cooking. And my value proposition is to one day change the world by leveraging my skills in diversity and social justice and applying it to the workplace.
Excellent. Thank you. One more? All right, one more. Step right up.
My name is Gloria Emanuel. I'm originally from Manassas, Virginia, but I'm currently living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I have degrees in my MBA in international management, and I'm working on my doctorate in cognitive psychology. I am currently a researcher at Sandia National Laboratories. I aspire to be an empiricist and a generalist. My favorite brand is Banana Republic. I love international traveling and Isaac. And my value proposition is to quantify the human dimension in engineered systems.
Excellent. Thank you. So I actually use this when I bring a new person on board on my team at Microsoft, because many times what happens in large organizations, and even small ones, is people will go by someone's office and they'll ask a lot of questions, they'll create small talk, but you don't really get to know what that person is, what they aspire to be. That's probably the most important question. What do you aspire to be? Because we all do jobs in our daily life, but I think we're now at a point where we aspire to be something greater. So what's the SIOP story? And I have to talk about this because we're moving in a direction now where there is a value proposition that's important in terms of SIOP, the pivot it's taking, the new branding, the new logo. So SIOP, as noted here, SIOP is the professional organization of choice for IO psychologists. It offers a forum for collaboration and serves as a focal point for the design and dissemination of high-quality, evidence-based HR and organizational solutions. SIOP provides access to the resources, thought leadership, and mentoring opportunities that enable IO psychologists to continuously innovate and have a positive impact on both organizations and society. And we'll actually show a couple slides later how this actually is evolving and innovating and how we can sort of latch on to that greater message and help sort of foster that as IO psychologists to reach other people who may be IO psychologists or may not be IO psychologists. So 3 things to take away as we go through the rest of the presentation. The past as prologue. We'll talk a little bit about where the economy was and where it's moving and how IO psychology fits into that, how your value proposition fits into that. How to design think your personal brand. And then the big one, we are what we create. We are now moving into a maker society. And this one's important because many times when I talk to people, they say, I don't really make anything, Jeff. I don't 3D print anything in my house. I don't make anything tangible. We have to think about things in a different way, which is, do you create thought leadership? Well, yes, you're creating something. You create knowledge. You create ideas. That's important to know because we're all in a field where we are creating a lot of interesting data and trying to interpret that data. And that should not be sort of left or looked at as, oh, well, you just do something that isn't very important for the organization. It's probably the most important thing. So we're going to go into a little bit of a history lesson now to explain where we've been and how that sort of comes full circle, the O, in terms of how IO psychology fits into. So, whoso neglects learning in his youth loses the past and is dead for the future. So let's go way back to, wow, I think I learned this maybe in elementary school. The ancient economy, Mesopotamia. This is important because it actually is interesting in terms of looking at the data of where we've been and where we're moving. So Mesopotamia was the cradle of civilization, our Western civilization, considered the cradle of Western civilization. And the economy was based on barter trade of goods from agriculture and clothing. It was also based heavily on reputation. You would barter with others that you actually knew had a good reputation. It was an emphasis on locally made goods. The population gravitated toward urban centers, and citizens developed artisanal skills, agriculture, creating, and producing. Translation in the 21st century is the maker economy. And there was a heavy emphasis on the individual and small groups innovation. This civilization actually created the first battery as we knew it. The development of skilled specialists and the reputation as business currency was used, as I noted. And then there were philosophical questions in this particular part of history, which was, who are we, where are we, and how did we get here? So let's fast forward a little bit into the industrial economy. Mainly based in London, spread across the world. And London, of course, was the gateway to Europe, so ideas constantly are going between London and the continent based on geography. But the economy was based on manufacturing and sale of goods exported and imported globally, and an emphasis on machine-made goods. So you went from making things by hand to actually creating machines to make things and make more of them. And you could export them. Again, population heavily in urban areas. And citizens developed mechanical skills. But the emphasis was on company-owned innovation. So you could create something but you didn't really own it. The company owned it. Or they would take your idea. And this was also the time when we actually developed modern brands that told, explained narratives, so to speak. So you had the emergence of steel magnets and textile companies. And the philosophical questions asked here is, has industry destroyed nature and human relationships? Is reason and individualism the way toward a better society? And what is the legitimacy of the authority of the state over the individual? So now let's actually move to where I think we are now. Some people actually will think we're still in the industrial economy, but I think now we're moving more into a digital reimagination economy. And again, based in really started in Silicon Valley, now spreading all over across the world at a rapid rate. And of course, I think a lot of it is because we've moved from the cradle of civilization, and notice we're moving slowly west to the point where we can't really go anywhere else and we'll fall into the Pacific Ocean. I think a lot of that is also, I lived in New York for such a long period of time, and now being in Seattle, I think a lot of that is also, you have to have a very pioneering spirit sometimes when you're in the 1800s when people moved west, and I think a lot of that still sort of exists, so people come up with some of these interesting, unique ideas. But the economy is based on the development of services and an emphasis on software-developed products or software as a service. And the population, again, gravitating toward urban areas of higher education now. We've seen a lot of studies showing that areas that have universities, probably one of the fastest growing areas is Columbus, Ohio, if you could believe that, based on the fact that you have the Ohio State University and a number of other universities. Bowling Green is not too far from there as well, that sort of allow a lot of companies to have brain power, so to speak. And citizens are developing technical skills. And again, a heavy emphasis on entrepreneurial innovation in small collaborative clusters. And here's where we see the development of the sharing economy as the business narrative. And the philosophical questions we ask ourselves here is, can technology bring us together? Is logic and collaboration the way toward a better society? And what is the right of privacy of the individual in an ultra-transparent world where everything is public? So now let's put the futurology cap on here and look at maybe where we're going and how IO psychology may fit into this, which is based on reputation economics. So it would be a knowledge or a maker economy. And again, a lot of this is speculative mixed with also some other analytics that we've looked at and insights. India, Turkey, Israel. Someone said they were from Tel Aviv. I've done a lot of business in Tel Aviv. A lot of great startups there, which spreads to the rest of the world. And notice it's the full circle theory. You've already gone all the way, you can't go anymore, and you come all the way back. And the reason I actually picked these areas is because you have a high amount of entrepreneurial economics based in these areas now. You also have a number of businesses that aren't really relying on old technology, so to speak, really sort of creating a new way of thinking of things. And again, a lot of this, I think, is inspired by Silicon Valley. So the economy will be based on 3D manufacturing and sale of locally sourced goods and services. Again, full circle, locally goods and services. Emphasis on prototype design for an all-inclusive society. Population, again, gravitating toward urban centers once abandoned. Detroit, actually I think will revise in the next 20 years because it's an area where you actually move to because some of the areas are too expensive now for many people to live as we move more toward a knowledge-based society. And citizens develop application skills. So how do we apply this to improve the world? And a heavy emphasis on meritocratic hive mind, collaborative innovation, and the redevelopment of reputation as business narratives. So what do you do and what do you offer the world? Heavily involved in the reputation, which is why I asked everyone to tell their stories, their personal story, so to speak. And the philosophical questions I think we may ask at this time is, what is the motivation to work if money is not the currency? How do we solve the world's biggest problems? And what is the separation between technology and human life? So things to think about there, because if we move in that direction, there's probably more demand on your field than ever before because we have a lot of problems that are not black and white, a lot of gray. Heavy emphasis on data to figure those problems out. Had a great conversation last night with some of the Microsoft folks that are here. And we talked a lot about this. How do you actually use data to solve some of the biggest problems in the world? Now, from an IO psychology standpoint, how do you use data to find the right people to solve those problems? How do you motivate them? What are the motivators? So this is a big area because we now have 3, almost 4 generations in the workforce, and things are going to change even more at a rapid rate on how we motivate people. As we noted from one of the individuals who came up here, she said she wanted to change the world. Notice she didn't say, I want to make $1 million. Very important to note this. So how do we take all this and design think our own personal brand? Because this is important. Again, we think about branding. It's not so much about big brands. It's really about what we do, how we evolve. So Tim Brown wrote a really great book. I love it. Design can help to improve our lives in the present, and design thinking can help us chart a path into the future. Very much probably what we do, or I should say what you do as an IO psychologist. And you might think, and I talk to a lot of people about this, they say, I don't do design, Jeff. And I say, do you use numbers to plot a course? Yes, that's design. Don't think about design as graphic design. Think about it as engineering. A lot of us engineer results now. So again, how do you look at the world in a different way than how we've looked at it for the past 50 years? So design thinking and personal branding, and I've used this a lot with people in my organization. I'll ask them to answer some of these questions and use the 3 boxes, so to speak: stance, tools, and experiences. So what's their stance in the world? What's the data they can use? What are their experiences? How do they pull all this together to figure out who they are, what they would like to be? Who am I in the world, and what am I trying to accomplish? It's a big question. With what tools and models do I organize my thinking and understand the world? And with what experiences can I build my repertoire of sensitivities and skills? And again, this is also very important because a lot of times we get into a field and we're not going to necessarily stop working within that field. We're going to constantly evolve, constantly innovate, constantly figure out what's the next step that we're going to take. So the big question here is to also think about, well, yes, I'm in IO psychology, but where's that going? How am I going to fit into that as it evolves? And I'm sure you spent most of the time talking a lot about that the past couple of days, and probably came up with some interesting experiences that you want to take back and actually apply to your own life, apply to your fields of research, etc. So now, I asked everyone what their story was and laid it out in a way that involved a lot of verbiage. But how do we actually simplify that? And that goes back into the fact that you can simplify things through visual experiences, but you can also simplify through words. So if you have to explain to people a large paragraph, And note the value proposition from SIOP with the original brand logo had a very, very complex way to look at the field. How do you simplify that? So think of these questions. What do you provide? How do you work with others? Where do you apply your thinking? How do you quantify your work? And what's your manifesto one-liner? So here's my example. I'm a business futurist, I'm a design thinker, I'm a technology influencer, I'm data-driven, and thinking is my commodity. Now apply that thinking as well. So if this lives just as words, so to speak, that's interesting. But we have to also involve the visual elements as well. So what colors are going to represent us? And this is actually interesting. There's a lot of studies here that brands actually don't just come up with their logo per chance. Colors emote specific thinking, feeling toward them. That's why if you actually look, Facebook, Skype, and Intel use blue. There's a trust factor there. So think what colors represent your brand, along with the simplification verbiage, and then let's move into the new side of SIOP. Solutions-oriented, trusted partner, strategically focused, scientifically rigorous, science for a smarter workplace. Hey, if anything, if you're at a cocktail party and someone says, what do you do? And I say, well, I'm an IO psychologist and I belong to SIOP. What is that? Science for a smarter workplace. They're going to ask you what you do. The other interesting thing here is the color scheme. The red and grays, moving away from the black and whites. So red now ingrained with the logo. And I think the most important thing, if you look at comparing this new logo from the old logo, the old logo was an O with the I in the center. Let's just back up here for a second so we can just see the visual. I apologize, everyone. The I was in the center, and if it actually pulls you in, and maybe I'll ask a show of hands, what mainly draws you in when you actually look at that logo? Negative space. What else? What is the O surrounding? The letter I. You focus on the I. The letter I is actually linear. It has a beginning and a finite ending. The new logo, if we fast forward back, draws you into the O. The O has no finite ending. It is not linear. Because you are actually using science, it is infinite. You're constantly doing things in perpetuity. That is one of the, I think, and this is interesting, I remember talking to Robin and Tammy on the phone about this, and I analyzed this and said, this is a wonderful logo in terms of explaining what you do, because it draws me into the O, and the O is infinite. What you do as an IO psychologist never really stops if you think about it. It's not like you just go to work and say, we found the answers, here's how we're going to make the organization better. All we have to do is plug it in and make it happen. Because workplaces are constantly changing, constantly evolving. Technology changes it. The people moving into the workforce change it. The fact that everyone moves to an urban center changes it. The fact we're moving toward a relationship economic model changes it. So we go from black and white, the bold power mystery, to gray and red, which is passion, immediacy, and energy. And immediacy is a big one, because we now live in a world where the mobile phone connects us all. And the mobile phone, if anything, is a sign of immediacy. So the emphasis, again, on the old logo is on the I, the new one on O. The other emphasis in terms of the old logo was on society. Society to me means exclusivity. Hey, it's just us, we're in this room. The new logo, the emphasis is on science, which is inclusivity. How do you make the world better for everyone? So finally, we'll move into this section in terms of we are what we create. Then I want you to think about this as you go back and work on new assignments, or ask other people to work on new assignments, or analyzing people in terms of what they're doing. So until recently, the ability to manufacture was reserved for those who owned factories. What's happened over the last 5 years is that we've brought the web's democratizing power to manufacturing. Today, you can manufacture with the push of a button. Now think about this in terms of manufacturing as publishing. I remember when my father was a professor in the 70s, to publish something was very, very difficult. And to disseminate that information was even more difficult. Now, there's much more that we can do that actually can connect all of our information, connect us, and get more information out to those that we want to actually persuade and influence. And I think the more we talk about IO psychology, the more we publish about it, the more it becomes very relevant to others who are trying to understand how it fits into the workplace. So thinking, ideas, and knowledge in a maker society contain value. I remember an old boss of mine said to me, "Hey, what are you doing with that client?" And I said, "We're coming up with some ideas for them." And he said, "You're just giving those ideas away?" I said, "Yeah, of course we are." There's value there. So we have to remember that. Many times people think, oh, you're not doing really anything because you're not making anything, but the information that you generate has value. And content that you create has currency because it's in the form of utility. So we talk a lot about content marketing, but one of the things that's actually interesting is if that content has utility and more people can utilize it, it spreads your message at a more rapid rate. So again, making isn't just limited to physical creations, but ideas which help build stronger ideas. The O, so think about the O not just as organizational, but for open source. And then the big one, marketing your brand, whether it's your personal brand, the IO Psychology brand, SIOP, isn't about selling something for dollars, but influencing how others think. That's really what marketing is now. It's not necessarily about I want to get people to buy a soda, I want to get people to buy software, I want to get people to buy a phone. It's I want to get people to actually believe this based on evidence that we've presented. And how you present that is very important. There's a whole factor that how we use media really is the new creativity. So ideas and things you have created using stance, tools, data, experiences, and science are very important. So the 3 things to take away. And hopefully I've left you with some things that you can think about and apply to your own field and your own career. What is your story, your value proposition? How does it align to and promote your involvement in SIOP? How do you visualize your story with design thinking and visualize it for others? And how do you create the future and the future of SIOP by what you make? Thanks again.
Thank you, Jeff, for that address. Let me present you
Thanks, Tammy.
with a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Oops.
It is now my distinct pleasure to present to you the person who will lead SIOP as president in the coming year, Dr. Jose Cortina. Jose is professor of psychology at George Mason University. His recent research has involved topics in meta-analysis, structural equation modeling, and significance testing, as well as predictors and outcomes of emotions in the workplace. He currently serves as editor of Organizational Research Methods, former editor of Organizational Research Methods, and is a former associate editor of the Journal of Applied Psychology. In 2001, he received the SIOP Distinguished Early Career Contributions Award, and in 2011, the SIOP Distinguished Teaching Award. He received his doctoral degree from Michigan State and is a SIOP Fellow. Jose, we are confident that you will do an exceptional job in leading the organization this year. I will now like to present you with the official presidential gavel.
Not bad. Yeah, it's vertically challenged. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, everyone. Like everyone else in the room, I aspire to be Tamtastic. I've been given a few minutes just to very briefly discuss with you, introduce to you my goals. I've been working on this indirectly for a long time with lots of other people, directly since I learned that I was going to be SIOP president, and I hope for the next 2 years to push a particular agenda forward. My theme is labeled The Revolution with a Solution, Culling the Madness from Our Methods. As some of you know, I shamelessly stole this term from Bob Vandenberg and Jeff Edwards. The idea is this: there are always things that we could do better with regard to research methods. But that will always be true, and that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what I and many others perceive to be far too many methodological choices that are made and reflected in all of our journals that are just plain wrong. These aren't the pet peeves of a methods geek. These are substantive mistakes being pointed out by a methods geek. And tweaks won't do it. We need a revolution. But I want to be clear about sort of culpability here. I'm not calling out individuals. I've been an editor, a reviewer, an editorial board member. I am more to blame for this stuff than the vast majority. This is about thinking about the way that we conduct research and thinking about, regardless of why it happened, where the deficiencies are and what we need to do as a group, as a profession, to address these things. So I'm just going to give you a few examples and let you start thinking about whether you consider these to be big problems and whether they're worth addressing. But my job over the next year is to sell authors on the need to change, but it's more to sell the gatekeepers, the editors, all of you in your roles as editors and reviewers, that although these problems won't be easy to solve, that they are serious enough to address. So here's an example. These are my words, but suppose you read this in a results section of a paper that you were reviewing. In order to test our hypothesized model, we applied SEM to an entirely different model, but we can't tell you what it is. CFI for this model was 0.92, RMSEA was 0.07, therefore our data support our hypothesized model. Now you're probably thinking, Jose, that's silly, that would never happen. And you're right, that wouldn't happen. Authors would never be that candid. And yet this happens all the time. Everyone can agree that what I just read is absurd, and this happens all the time. The only difference between the passage that I just made up and the one that I read in journal articles is the one that I made up is a bit more direct about what's going on. I'm working on a paper with two of my wonderful students, Jen Green and Kate Keeler, we're doing a variety of things, but among them, we're just counting the degrees of freedom in papers that use structural equations modeling, and we're comparing them when we can to the reported degrees of freedom. They often don't align, and a lot of people don't know what that means. What it means is authors are hypothesizing one model, they're testing a different model, and no one catches it. Hypothesizing one model, testing a different model, and no one catches it. The discrepancy in degrees of freedom is the symptom of that problem. As a reviewer, you don't necessarily know why that discrepancy is there, but you do know that the model being tested is not the one that's being hypothesized. Surely we can all agree that that's a problem. I will give even money that if I pick up an issue of any of our journals, find the first SEM, and count degrees of freedom, that they're wrong. Because I've done this many, many, many times, and I know that the norm is actually for them to be wrong when they should be right every single time. Speaking of SEM, multiple hurdle system. If you don't meet conventional standards, conventional cutoffs for fit indices, your paper is not going to survive. The reviewers are going to boot it out. That's the first hurdle in a multiple hurdle system. And as authors, we'll do anything we can get away with as a result to make sure that these fit indices are up to snuff. But why would we focus on these fit indices? I think most people aren't actually aware of what they tell us. We think, and the words that we write in our results section suggest, we believe that they tell us about the validity of the linkages that we defended in our introduction section, when in fact they tell us no such thing. I don't have time to, you'll be glad to know, to go through this slide. I better just skip all this altogether. In our intro, we define the linkages that we then test. The fit indices don't tell us about those linkages. They tell us about the linkages that we left out. They tell us about whether we were right to omit the linkages that we omitted. That's not useless information, but why on earth would that be the deal breaker? Why would that be the thing such that if we don't meet conventional standards, the entire paper goes out the window? Why wouldn't we focus on the linkages and then add in, consider the possibility that additional linkages might need to be added? To me, it doesn't make any sense that we would attach that much importance to those fit indices, but we do. Every journal that I know of does this. We also have no guidance or even convention regarding which of these fit indices to use. Authors give no justification for their choice of index. They offer only the most general interpretation possible, and this isn't surprising because, for the most part, we choose fit indices not because they give particular information, but because we're sifting through the long list of fit indices and finding the ones that are most flattering to our data. Not really a good system for a field that wants to think of itself as a science. What we've found in our reviews is different authors use different fit indices across their papers, but it's also true that the same authors use different fit indices across their papers, and in some instances, the same authors use different indices even within the same paper. This is just a matter of cherry picking and finding the fit indices that are most flattering. And again, it's one thing to try to get away with that. It's another thing to have a system that allows this to happen. That's the problem that I want to address. Two of our former students found, not surprisingly, that as a result of all of this, fit indices are very, very highly correlated, which is to say, we aren't actually reporting multiple fit indices, we're reporting the same fit index multiple times. What I would like to have happen is that editors account for these, recognize these as problems, and change the system so that we ensure that reviewers screen for truth and not for savvy with regard to the review process. It's not just the results section. It seems to me that even though we call for lots of different sorts of designs, longitudinal designs, field experiments, when we as reviewers get those papers, we don't really treat them fairly. Rick Deshawn described this earlier as authors are policy capturers. They figure out what the policy of the review process is, and that's what they do. If what they learn is people call for field experiments, but they're just too hard, and they aren't valued, no one will engage in that sort of behavior. It's purely rational. I don't think I have time to go through the Hebel et al. Study. If you haven't read the Hebel et al. JAP study on pregnancy stigma, from JAP in 2007 or 8 or so, you ought to, because it's one of the most brilliant examples of a field experiment that we will ever see in our field, and it it was an ordeal to get that paper through the review process. It shouldn't have been, but it was. We also have issues on the theoretical end. There have been a variety of papers along these lines. Kachmer et al. 2000 found basically that the only time the model in an empirical paper gets tested is in that one paper. Nobody else ever tests it again. Jeff Edwards and some of his colleagues are finding that AMR models are never tested at all. If we as an applied field believe that a theory is only useful if at some point it gets tested, then we end up with this interesting paradox that stems from our insistence on theoretical contribution. By requiring papers to make a theoretical contribution, we guarantee that they don't. I am as guilty of this as anybody. I've written the no theoretical contribution paragraph 100 times, more than that probably, but I think it's stifling our development as a field. And again, there are things that we can do about this, but we have to decide that they're worth doing. The revolution, the solution part anyway, involves gatekeepers deciding that the rules need to change. We have to communicate different standards, we have to know which errors to look out for, and we have to know how to find them. And I think the solution here is continuing education, not necessarily tacking on more courses, although additional training wouldn't help, but new techniques emerge, new loopholes emerge, and there has to be a continuing process of education for reviewers so that the problems that I'm describing get caught. I'd like to see and begin to set up over the next year or two some sort of reviewer boot camp system. If you want to be on the board of whatever journal, there is a process that you go through to ensure that you actually know which things to look out for and how to flag them. I would like to see a continuing ed credit sort of model here at SIOP, perhaps using Karma and Larry Williams' group at Wayne State, the Research Methods Division at Academy. There are lots of mechanisms for doing this, but I'd like to get to a point where at least somebody reviewing a paper knows to look for some of these problems that I'm mentioning, and those people can ensure that at least authors get feedback with regard to those things. And I'd like to see different publication criteria. If a hypothesis doesn't make sense, don't tell the authors to bolster it. Tell them to chuck it. If someone conducts a constructive replication, publish it. Make everyone aware that those sorts of designs are in fact desirable. And allow acceptance to be driven by the intro and the method, perhaps, and then let the chips fall where they may. Hopefully, what we can end up with is a system in which we discover what is true about human behavior and cognition in the workplace, and not so much about what a prospective author knows about the way that the publication process works. Thank you. Do I keep my gavel? Hey, Tamtastic, would you come up here, please? On behalf of the Society, and I know this personally because I've seen her at work for the last year and a half, I would like to thank you for your stalwart efforts on behalf of the Society. You have been a wonderful, wonderful SIOP president. Thank you.
Okay, so next year SIOP will be headed to the city of brotherly love, historic Philadelphia. I will not be planning that conference because this is my last conference as conference chair. And what a tamtastic conference it was. So in keeping with the small but mighty tradition, Eden King will be taking over as your conference chair. Is Eden here? Stand up, Eden, over here. So I know I'm leaving you in excellent hands. A couple of announcements. Our closing Spirit of Hawaii reception will be taking place at 5 o'clock on the Great Lawn at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. I hope you all come. We're going to have some fantastic entertainment, some Hawaiian-style food. Should be a lot of fun, so I hope you don't miss it. And this is going to conclude the closing plenary session. I want to thank all of you for coming and participating. I know it was so beautiful outside, but a lot of you went to all the sessions. I've heard great feedback, so I want to thank you all for coming. I'm making this such a fantastic conference. And before I close, I just want to thank Dave Nershi and the fabulous administrative office, because they really are the backbone of this conference. So big round of applause for them.
You can't leave yet. One more thing.
So thank you, but I can't leave yet. So you can't either.
Yeah, you can't either. On behalf of the Society, we have a couple of final thanks to give. One is, I think, well, both having to do with the conference. I think when we look back on this conference years from now, many of us will say to each other, you know what my favorite conference was? It was Honolulu. And there are two people in particular that we can thank for that. We'd like to give them some thanks. One is our wonderful conference chair, Robin Cohen Reisenstein. And the other is our wonderful program chair, Evan Sinar, who needs to come up here. You need to close, so you can't leave. Good job. Thank you so much. Great job. Okay, now you can finish.
So that's it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you at the reception.